A few things have been obviously very prevalent lately, and I'm curious about a couple things. We don't have to get too deeply into this. Kind of curious where people are on the surface. Obviously, we'll be including John and Traci in this question or these questions. The pandemic still exists, and just in my drive up here today from Detroit, where I've been pretty hunkered down, I saw a few examples of things that are kind of past, I think, the point of reopening with some protocol, and almost as if it's just being ignored. And and this is a very difficult, complex thing. I'm not going to try to be in great judgment of it, but the pandemic is still around. We've had some things that have, I think, been help with the confusion, with the governor participating and after putting out the orders, being strict about it, and then participating in the march, and being seen near people without a mask on outside. We've talked about the importance of that march historically, and the ability to make change with it that's way past due, and how it sucked that it's during the pandemic, but it's something that we can't find an alternative for, different from the other protests. We talked about that last week. But I had my point with that. The single biggest day for infections around the world recently took place. It was yesterday. And I want to say the number is like 156,000 new infections around the world yesterday. And it's the single biggest day since this has happened. And then there's areas of the country where the trajectory is still going up. It's mellowed a little bit here in Michigan. We're starting to reopen. Yeah. So anyway, there's a lot of stuff we're going to talk about. We're going to talk with John. He's got obviously the Cannapalooza event to be discussed. A lot of people have interest in that, so we'll get to that for sure. But anyway, I wanted to know if people think people are getting too complacent with everything, given all the totality of the circumstances and that type of stuff. And just because it's so timely and it's been talked about a lot, there's this discussion of defunding police, which means better priority, putting resources directly towards social programs and things like that, instead of like via the police to help monitor or control, or however it's been working out, to have police demonstrate a change of approach, that type of thing. And not everybody totally is into that. And I've read a lot of different opinions, varying opinions, but I think when somebody gets to understand what it talks about and is in line with the need for reform, the institutionalized kind of issues that have just been inherent in those systems for forever, since the beginning, it's a way to try to attack that, but it is confusing, and some people just don't necessarily are into the approach. So I guess I want to know, do you think people are getting a little bit too complacent at this point with the pandemic, and up or down on the defund me movement? Rick, you mind weighing in on that and then asking everybody else?
Well, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. It is June 9th, by the way, 2020, for the Jazz Cabbage Cafe. Thank you, Jamie Lowell and his band of stagecoach thieves. Hi, guys. Wear those bandanas high, right? They can identify you by the eyes nowadays. So one thing to point out is the defund movement isn't what you might immediately imagine it to be based on the title. The title gives people the impression that folks would like to take all money away from police. There'd be no 911 services. There'd be no response if you needed assistance. In fact, that's actually not true. The defund movement has several different goals, which would allow some of the resources that are typically dumped into law enforcement to be used in other areas where it would be beneficial socially. So defund is actually a refund. And that's also doesn't sound correctly, but a reimagining of the funding for police departments. Camden, New Jersey just went through this 10 years ago, I believe. It's now a case study for how this can successfully be done in the United States of America. Camden had a horrible history, not only with crime, but also with their police department. So I believe that when we talk about defund the police, it's an intriguing idea. I would like to see this started in more pilot programs in different areas, so that before we start doing something on a massive scale across the United States, we have some experimentation available so that we make smart decisions to do that. That's my thought about defund. Now, I'd like to introduce Debra Young. Deb is, of course, a cannabis law reform advocate and an organizer of local
What do
petition
you think
drives,
about
but
the-
also has been very active in the Democratic Party for a long
Hey, Rick,
time.
let me just interject. I'm sorry, man. What do you think about the complacency thing? This is just to add to the two. We're unusually have two quick questions here.
Yeah,
I guess you don't have to weigh in if you didn't want to.
I'm not complacent about the complacency thing. So no, that was just a joke answer. Fact is, I believe that there are a lot of people out there that have just been chomping at the bit to get back into normal, so they're rushing to normal. So I believe that there are some people that are going too fast. However, in society, there's always going to be people that do it right, people that do it really wrong, and people that do it overly correct. So that's just the big spectrum of folks. I went to the gas station today and two guys in there didn't have masks on. Everybody else did. That's going to become common. So Deb, are we moving at the right pace? Are we going too fast? And what's your opinion about defund the cops?
Well, defund, I agree with you. We obviously can't defund all police services, but when police departments had enough extra scratch to buy tanks and complete riot gear and multiple crazy, militarized weaponry, then they obviously have way too much money. So yeah, we have to defund those parts of law enforcement, because obviously you have to have 911 services and things like that. But we have to really look at this, and we have to really chop at their budgets. And we've been advocating that for years. As far as the pandemic situation is right now, I believe there was a certain amount of people who did not take this seriously from the beginning. Eased up a little too quickly. I'm afraid of this thing, and I know that there's going to be one in the fall. I'm afraid it might be a little earlier because everybody was out protesting. It was such an important, historical event, and they felt so strongly about it that they were willing to risk that and go out. Most of the people did have masks on, but I think a mask is like a condom. It's only so effective against things, you know what I mean? So it's like safer breathing. There's no such thing as safe anymore. It's maybe safer. So yeah, I think we moved a little too quickly. I hope that we don't pay the price for it. I'm still staying at home as much as possible, only going out, for something that I absolutely have to do, and basically in mask and things like that. So yeah, defund these cops. They don't need all that money. You could probably slash their budgets in half, and they could probably perform the services that were needed. The money should be put into education, into mental health services, and there's all kinds of programs that money could go for.
I'm now envisioning a whole line of face masks sponsored by Trojan Company. I just think they'd sell like hotcakes. Jim Salame, entertainer, home of medicine, decriminalized nature, Ann Arbor. Lots of philanthropy in your history. Talk about the two questions here: defund police, as well as, are we being too complacent? Are we rushing back to normal too fast?
Are we rushing back to normal too fast? Hi, everybody. It's good to see everyone. I wasn't here last week, so I'm really glad to be back. So, but are we defunding the police? Or, I'm sorry, are we moving too fast? I think in some respects we are. I mean, it really depends on the city and the area. Really, I've seen it pretty lax around my town here in Saline. And I don't know, it's like part of, I think it's just what this town is all about. So you go to other places and people are a little bit more serious. Downtown Ann Arbor yesterday was completely packed up and down Main Street. All the stores, not the stores, but rather the restaurants were pretty packed with people. I was pretty surprised by it, actually. I myself am not that comfortable because of some health issues to just go out and sit among them. But those people might be a lot healthier in that respect. And so everybody's different in how they're going to approach this. I think that it's going to go as it does, and you really can't stop people from doing what they want to do. When it comes to, defunding the police, I really think that that's something that we got to be really careful of the words we throw out. And it's a political football, because now the Republicans are saying the Democrats want to take all the money away from the police, and it's getting people in an uproar, and it's getting people scared. And it's not, I think we have to go slower about it. I don't know enough about what funding the police departments actually receive, to speak on it all that intelligently. But I'll say that I know that we need to reform, like, the strangleholds and being able to sue them because the immunity things that they have, I think, in place. But again, I don't know enough to speak on it. But these are some of the things I think reforming in that way would be.
Yep. Thank you, Jim.
You're
Very
welcome.
wise words. I think Derek Gauci, you are a family man. You got a couple of kids floating around, got a small business, photography. You're absolutely affected on many different levels by the situation we've had COVID here. Are we rushing back too fast? And then also as a person, sort of in a younger scope, what do you think about defunding the police or at least changing the way we fund police?
Definitely been known to leave a few floaters from time to time. So no, like that.
How is that related? I don't understand. Public restrooms? Is that what we're referring to all of a sudden?
All right, anyway, so I do have children.
Sorry about being out in the river and just letting it.
I believe that, it's kind of going
I
at
had to come back for that.
means that like the majority of people that I run into and talk to on a daily basis aren't necessarily at this time getting sick, or the numbers around us aren't necessarily getting worse. So I think that a slow opening is okay because it can definitely help, boost our economy and things like that, as long as we take it easy and like everybody in Jamie's video, rock the bandanas and worry about each other and keep each other safe.
Yeah.
Right on.
In terms of defunding
Shit.
what up, Razor? But in terms of defunding the police, I don't think that there's any clear answer here, as to what should be done. However, but I do think there are some things that stick out very clearly, and that's the most important thing right now is that we make the police department, if they are going to coexist, realize that Black Lives Matter.
I think it's important for us to separate the difference between ideas and actual suggestions for actions. Black Lives Matter is a great idea, but it's not really a set of goals moving forward. A set of goals moving forward would be what's been proposed with the defund police. So that's one of the reasons why we're talking about this. They've actually got some suggested methodology that's included. Colin, you're a big dude. I'm sorry.
I would have to say that the ideology behind Black Lives Matter very much is more, I think it's more powerful than just defunding the police department. I think that it goes into making people psychologically, responsible for the people that they hire, the people they employ, all the way up through the top.
Yeah, I do kind of think that an overhaul that demonstrates those things, like we've been retrained, those cops have had several complaints against them over the years and nothing done, have been re-examined. I mean, many things to demonstrate that a new approach and overhaul was taken in that department or agency. If it needs to be scrapped and redone, fine. But if there's already a lot of good actors and it's a fairly non-corrupt place, they get in line sooner.
And what they did in Camden, New Jersey, as I mentioned earlier, they dissolved the police department, remade a police department, and made all the officers reapply. And by that methodology, they were able to weed out officers that had had problems in the past, and then take all of the officers that had been positive with their interactions with the public and be able to not only bring them back into the new agency, but then perhaps actually elevate them. So through that methodology, they were able to filter out bad police officers. Colin MacDougall, you've heard all of the questions, you've heard all the things we got going on. What's your position on defund? And also, are we moving too fast on this recovery, brother?
So on Sunday, I went to the Black Lives Matter protest in Dearborn at the Historical Museum. It was organized because there was a statue of Mayor Hubbard. He was like a racist mayor and
He was a bad man. He was a bad man.
And the statue is actually owned by his family. And so on like Thursday or Wednesday last week, somebody put a Black Lives Matter t-shirt over him. and the statue is gone by Friday. And they, I guess the family moving it to Union City that's where he was born and that's where his like gravesite is. So I was I wore a mask the entire time and tried to social distance as much as possible. And that was kind of the sentiment that I saw at the Black Lives Matter protest. And there was at least 300 people in Dearborn, and it was like the biggest protest I've ever seen in the city. So I think in a way, I'm sure a lot of people are eager to get out. And I know some people who are a lot more lax than me with wearing a mask and just being in public. I'm not at the point where I'm going to start going to restaurants just yet. And I still have to work from home for now. So I'm okay with that. As far as like defunding the police, I think we all talked about it. Like the messaging is wrong. We need to like create like community oversight boards to watch, look at officers' misbehaviors and all incidents that are reported. That is not like the local district court judge or prosecutor. I think that another thing is we should put funding towards like social workers who can respond to some of these calls instead of the police. You know, there's way better ways of managing people, especially, you know, like cannabis people. We get antsy and we don't want to talk to the police because a lot of people have had negative incidents with them, and especially in the African American communities. And so I think that in Michigan, they were talking at the rally that said that there were in Southeast Michigan, there is technically like a police station within every like 10 square miles, because there's like there's over 200 different municipalities in like Southeast Michigan. And they all have their own police forces, and there's different county police forces. And it's just really amazing to think. And, you know, like from my perspective, there is within like 5 miles of my house, there is maybe if I said 6 miles, it probably about 5 different police stations in between Wayne County Sheriff, Dearborn Heights, City of Inkster, Michigan State Police. And it's just kind of, we just never imagined that like all of our tax money kind of is divided so much up and put into these different municipalities, police stations. So I think that maybe there should be some way, at least in Southeast Michigan, where all these different separate municipal police stations kind of become like one in a way, or just consolidate them a lot better.
Colin, we've seen in some of the smaller communities agreements made between different cities where they'll share fire services, they'll share police services, where one agency will actually police 3 or 4 different local municipalities, and those officers just have to be familiar with the different rules that there are in each one of those communities. That's sort of what you're suggesting, right? That we consolidate the police, and not to eliminate them completely, but just to consolidate the services.
So we still got a couple people to check in on our questions. We've been joined by Roche since then, and in relation to part of your news today, we did talk about the story of Berner and the cookies and their response to the property damage, and Roche had a few points of view on that. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more since he's around, but get back on track.
Well, Razor Ray Reyes has joined us live too, and Razor's been watching the show now for a couple of minutes, so he's familiar with the questions we've been asking all of our attendees today, and they really are we going too fast on this reopening? Is it more dangerous to reopen as quickly as we are? Secondarily, what's your feeling about defund the police, with the understanding that it doesn't necessarily mean take away all money from the police, it's more of a refund or a rework of the police idea?
Well, I think it's a good idea to be moving some of that money that has been grossly benefiting the police force and allowing them to do so much just power tripping, and allow that money to go to some other programs that would benefit the actual people. I think that's one. Now, your first question was, I kind of like with that short-term memory.
It's are we going too fast on the restart of the economy? Are people not going to behave in ways that are going to keep them safe from a reissuing of the virus?
You know what? I feel like people are kind of I'm really on the fence about that one, man. There's some people that are just like, yeah, let's keep socially separated still. And then there's just a lot of, in that process, been learning and hearing from people. I've been hearing from people who work in the medical field that are like, yeah, we have tagged people as that come in dying from other things as COVID, because our company's losing money for all the other procedures they have to give up. So, this is kind of a way for them to set up, the balance. But it's also an obvious movement of giving people a sense of fear through numbers. So, and keeping that in mind, and I'm not just hearing this from some YouTube video or somebody that was just online. I'm talking to a friend who works in the industry. So keeping that in mind, and also keeping in mind that people that do have a legitimate fear, because there's a definite health concern, and it's a balancing act, isn't it?
And it's a first time ever balancing act, Ray.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't fault decision makers for maybe being overly cautious, because at that point they didn't know what the hell they were dealing with.
Exactly. So I'm just gonna say, let's just put the tip in, Rick. You know what I'm saying? Just put the tip in.
And that's the theme of our Naked Man segment, our new Naked Man segment on Jazz Cabbage every week. Tune in.
Exactly. I'm not wearing any fucking any pants, any underwear, any socks.
Jim Salame is our Naked Man of next week. Jim Salame, thank you
Fuck
for
yeah.
accepting that responsibility.
Jim, you're next.
All right. Yes.
I'm not.
Jim's not to get the tip.
Yeah.
Okay.
No Naked Man segment there. Roche, I'm going to get to you in just a second, but I know we've had our friends from Cannapalooza, Mr. Schlicker and Ms. Utley, hanging out for a little bit, and you've watched the dialogue since the beginning of the show. What's your collective idea about, are we moving too fast, too slow, or in regards to the defund the police or a refunding of the police? What's your opinion about that?
You want to start, Tracy?
Well, I guess we have a little bit of different perspective where we are. There's not very many people, and most of them that I've seen are taking it pretty serious. So, and like I haven't been taking my kids out in public and things like that.
Right on.
What about you, John? Are you seeing a lot of people up there taking it serious? Are you think that we're going maybe too slow then, if folks are already being very cautious? Could we move
I
ahead
think,
more quickly?
Up here, as Tracy said, we have much less people for sure. We're not near as populated. We're spread out typically, but throughout the pandemic, people have taken it pretty serious. The mask wearing, that took quite a while before people started to adhere to it. And now it's probably 50-50 on the amount of people that might actually be wearing them. I try to wear mine when I'm out in the public. For quite some time, I did not also go out very much. I stayed home, as many people up around me did. Well, only for necessities. I conducted a lot of my personal business outside in the parking lot or in a parking lot somewhere else if I had to, but that is kind of somewhat going back to the norm. And are we going too fast? I'm not so sure.
Just
I
so
think
our
maybe we
listeners
are.
know, Northeast Michigan normals from right up here. Okay, so
Correct.
it's really in the northern part. It's also in okay. Although our state doesn't have a weird thing like that though, John. So I mean,
New golf, yeah.
after the nuclear explosion, perhaps. But
Where'd all the hair
I guess
come from?
the important thing to remember, that's a zone that was allowed by the governor to reopen, or at least to get more leniency earlier than some of the areas where we live in southeastern or central Michigan.
That's correct. And where I'm at in Alcona, we were right on the southern edge of that reopening.
Yeah.
So
Because the Sheboygan area and
Yeah.
over, yeah.
like here
Alpena.
where we're at today at Thomas Mechanical, they're not they weren't fully open.
Till
Yeah.
Friday.
Right.
Yep.
So are we doing it too fast? To answer that, I don't know. There's been so many unknowns throughout this whole damn virus that I've tried to remain cautious. It was the toughest decision I could do to make cancel Cannapalooza,
Yeah.
And now I think it was a good decision because
Yeah.
there's still too many.
Hey, you know what? Let's get into that a little bit in a minute. Let's hear from Roche and let's get back to John and find out the more details about that.
So Roach,
Does the
you've
police
been listening
go
to
to
the
that?
dialogue here. You know what we're dealing with. We're talking about two different questions. Are we reopening too fast? And also the question of defunding the police. There's just been two recent articles, two recent stories. First of all, Brazil's going through a horrible situation right now where they are making mass graves. And secondly, the questions arise whether China knew that this was a potential pandemic a lot earlier in the situation. And did this arise actually at the end of 2019? Detroit suffered horribly at the hands of this particular virus. And if one of these actors on a world stage knew earlier than they told us about, it absolutely cost local lives. So when it comes to it, are we moving too quickly or too slowly on this reopening? And defund the police? Let me know what you got.
Yeah, I'll answer the COVID question first, and I kind of agree that there was, at least if there wasn't knowledge, it was still happening late in 2019. Because I know a few people that were, ridiculously sick, including myself. And do I feel that we're moving too fast? Not necessarily, because I think it's been around a lot longer. I think the herd immunity is starting to take effect. So I would say, if you're comfortable with it, then do it. I'm ready to start seeing like toilet paper back in the stores, though. We can get the ball rolling on that. I don't know who's on the button, but that'd be great.
What about defund? It's a complex issue. We talked about it a little earlier before you joined, but it doesn't necessarily mean suck all the cash away from the cops, but it is a broad-ranging program.
And if you remember, I had brought this very question up myself, and I was like, maybe I'm a little bit ahead of where we're at right now, but I guess here we are now. And having time to have thought about it, I think that I would like to see, in the perfect world, like social workers out there on the police force, just how they have a SWAT team to go in and get heavily armed assailants under control. We should have a heavily educated and heavily compassionate arm of the police to go in and get people in a nonviolent way when, we all know that sometimes people are asking for help when they're behaving like this.
Or we could combine them and have a paramilitary invasion of social workers.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. I think like the social workers now have to kind of take the Jehovah Witness route and put some boots on the ground and be out here and not just at the hospital after the person has hit rock bottom and is all fucked up. I'd like to see some aspect of that out in a police car.
Proactive, not reactive, right? That's what we're talking about.
Along with the head cracker that unfortunately, whether we like it or not, we need those kind of cops too.
Everybody's got a role. I think we all agree that there are certain situations where we need heavily armed SWAT teams. Jamie mentioned this the other day. SWAT, when it was originally formed, was specifically for high threat, high intensity terrorists or armed fugitive type things.
Yeah.
But when we talk about nowadays SWAT being used just to raid people to see if they have more than 12 cannabis plants in their basement, and this is not it's not an exaggeration. It's for real.
And they
And of
take all
course-
your shit.
Yeah, yep. So we have a situation that's been blown out of proportion, and this I think is a process by which we rack it back in. I saw a gentleman on CNN earlier. He summarized an African American historian. He says, and I took a look at the riots from 1919, and then I took a look at the riots from 1936, and I took at the riots from 1939, and then I look at the Watts riots, and I looked at the Detroit riots. He said, and every single time they said the same thing afterwards. They had the same list of grievances, the same list of reasonable requests to be accomplished after those riots. And they were the same list every time because it never got accomplished. So at some point you have to say the old methodology doesn't work, and what's going on right now in the streets is the new methodology. And God, I hope it works.
You know, I think people need to realize that the purpose of a lot of legislation, especially cannabis legislation early on, was not to keep the peace, but in fact to subjugate people of color. And at its very base and core, that's the purpose that it served and continues to serve.
Continues, right?
So if we're going to really you know, make a change, we have to completely dismantle all of that. And the way the police, you know, especially in the inner city, are trained is the same way I would imagine slave hunters and overseers were trained, you know, back in the day. There's really no difference. They serve the same purpose.
I watched John Oliver doing a segment. I hope
I just
everybody
thought
takes
of
a
that.
minute to watch it. Yep, it's about 35 minutes long. He did the entire show on police, and he showed one of the trainers of this guy, and he said, "You are a predator. You are the apex predator on the street, and you have to look at every one of those people as if they're a potential prey to you. If they do something wrong, you have to be willing to take their life, and if you're not willing to take their life, you can't be a police officer." And my jaw just dropped out. And he says this guy does like 150 events a year
Around the
all
country.
across the nation, spreading that concept, that mindset that we are the apex and everyone else is beneath us.
You know, and it also
That's-
showed a cop who was saying that if they defund him to be able to be involved in that very program, that they're just going to defy that and go ahead and do it anyway.
Yeah. So
That's where it's at.
So when I use the example of Camden, New Jersey, when they completely dissolved the police force, rebuilt the police force, and made everybody reapply, they were able to weed guys like that out because of whatever criteria they use for hiring. Maybe that's what we need to do. Maybe that's the methodology that we need to do as far as starting from ground up.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, there has to be like community oversight, you know, and not just like some person who comes to the hood and makes appearances and does photo ops. It should probably be like jury duty, you know, where if you're part of this neighborhood, you know, at some point in your life, a few times you're going to have to sit in and watch what the police have done and say if it was appropriate or not, or if this is what you want your community to be policed like.
Third-party accountability with some teeth, part of this new structure. I like that idea a lot. Hey, so you know what? I cut John off before he actually got to answer his question on defund police, and then we're going to get more into the Cannapalooza scenario and the details on that. Let's check in with John for a second and let him answer the question.
They're muted up, John. James.
Right. All right. Well, thank you. Yeah, defunding. I like the refund idea better. It is very misleading by the definition, because we do need the cops. Up here again, it's not like it is in the down, lower part of the state. It's almost like we need two sets of laws. So I like the concept of, I think Rick, somebody mentioned experimenting with this defunding or refunding, yeah, cut their funding to the militaristic kind of bullshit that, they don't need. Even up here, the drug task force, have them, the state police. But we have a county sheriff. We don't, where I live, covers the entire county, but they have 2 or 3 deputies on duty at a time. And we don't have a big problem related to the Black Lives Matter.
The population's
However,
really small up
support
here.
it. I support Black
Yeah.
Lives Matter, and there's been a couple of peaceful protests take place up around here, and I'm very proud of that.
Yeah.
So
Well, that makes sense, man.